Listen, pay attention. Chosen one. This moment is not accidental, and this message is not drifting through your day by chance. It arrives with precision. It reaches you because you are still standing when something expected you not to be. Take a breath and stay with this. There has been a quiet weight pressing on you lately. Not dramatic, not obvious, just persistent. Fatigue that sleep does not fully erase. Pressure that does not come from one clear source. A sense of being present in your life while also feeling strangely alone inside it. You have noticed it. You may not have named it, but you felt it. You have been functioning through it, showing up, completing tasks, answering messages, moving through responsibilities. On the surface, nothing collapsed. But internally, something has been asking for acknowledgement. A tension between staying composed and feeling stretched thin, between understanding what needs to be done and not fully knowing why it feels heavier than it should. This message is not here to alarm you. It is here to orient you. You are not being called out because you are weak. You are being addressed because you remained upright in conditions that quietly test stability. There is urgency here, but not panic. The urgency comes from timing, not danger. From awareness, not fear. You may have questioned yourself recently, wondered if your tiredness meant you were losing focus, if your need for space meant something was wrong, if the silence around you meant you had somehow fallen behind or been forgotten. None of those interpretations are accurate, but they are understandable given the pressure you are under. What matters is this. You did not fall apart. You did not disappear. You did not abandon yourself or your responsibilities. Even when motivation dipped, something in you stayed steady. Even when clarity felt delayed, you did not act recklessly. You remained standing. That fact alone tells a story, but not one that will be rushed. This transmission is intentional and personal. It is not meant to explain everything at once. It is meant to create alignment, to let you recognize that what you experienced has meaning, structure, and context beyond self-blame or confusion. Clarity is coming, but it unfolds step by step. For now, let it be enough to know this. You are not here by coincidence, and you are not addressed without reason. Something noticed your stability. Stay present. This message is not reaching everyone. It is not meant to. It is calibrated for a specific internal pattern, and if you are still listening, that already tells you something important. This is for you. Not because you sought a title or asked for an explanation, but because your response to pressure revealed an identity that does not need external confirmation. You did not opt into this moment. You were identified by how you moved through it. What happened involved you directly, not symbolically, not as a concept. Your nervous system, your attention, your emotional regulation were part of the event itself. While others might have reacted outwardly or disengaged entirely, you stayed engaged with reality. You adjusted without collapsing. You adapted without hardening. That is not common. You may think of strength as something you consciously summon. Effort, willpower, pushing through. But what marked you was not how hard you tried. It was how little you had to force yourself to stay functional. Your stability was not loud. It was automatic. There is a difference between conscious struggle and unconscious coherence. Conscious struggle looks like constant self-talk, constant correction, constant effort just to remain steady. Unconscious coherence looks quieter. It looks like you noticing pressure without being overtaken by it, like continuing your day even when something feels off, like choosing restraint instead of reaction without having to debate it internally. You did not feel heroic. You likely felt tired, maybe even numb at times. That does not invalidate what occurred. It confirms it. This message removes ambiguity because ambiguity no longer serves you. You are not someone who becomes stable only when conditions are ideal. You are someone whose baseline includes resilience. Not because you learn to suppress discomfort, but because your internal structure holds under strain. You may have questioned whether what you felt was meaningful enough to warrant attention. You may have minimized it because nothing visibly broke. But the absence of collapse is not the absence of impact. It is evidence of capacity. This is not about elevation or comparison. It is about recognition. You are being addressed because your system registered pressure and stayed regulated. Because you remained present. Because you did not fragment under load. That is the identity being named here. Chosen is not a label you wear. It is a description of function. And this message is for you because what happened required acknowledgement before it could be properly understood. There is one symptom you recognized immediately, even if you tried to rationalize it away. A deep, persistent fatigue that did not match your actual workload. Not the kind that comes from doing too much in a day, not the kind that disappears after rest. This fatigue sat underneath everything. It followed you even into moments that should have felt neutral or light. You could still function, but everything required slightly more internal effort than usual. You may have judged yourself for it. Wondered if you were losing discipline, if your focus was slipping, if you were becoming unmotivated or disengaged. That interpretation is understandable, but it is incomplete. This was not a flaw. It was a signal. Your system was not failing. It was processing pressure. When sustained pressure enters a stable system, the body and mind do not always respond with panic or breakdown. Sometimes they respond with conservation, with quiet recalibration, with a kind of internal dimming that preserves core function while reducing unnecessary output. That is what this fatigue represented. You were not drained because you were weak. You were conserving because something demanded stability. Think carefully. Even while tired, you remained aware. Even while heavy, you stayed oriented. Your judgment did not disappear. Your values did not blur. Your sense of self stayed intact. That matters. The fatigue was not asking you to stop being who you are. It was asking you to move more deliberately through a transitional phase. Physical sensations often carry emotional or cognitive information before language catches up. A tight chest without clear anxiety, slower reactions without confusion, a desire for quiet without withdrawal. These are not malfunctions. They are indicators that something is shifting internally. Pressure does not always announce itself loudly. Sometimes it registers as weight instead of alarm. If you experienced moments of emotional flatness, that does not mean you were disconnected. It means your system prioritized regulation over intensity. If you felt less reactive, less expressive, less driven to explain yourself, that was not avoidance. It was stabilization. Your body and mind chose coherence. This is why self-judgment was misplaced. You were not becoming less capable. You were becoming more contained, less scattered, less volatile, more centered, even if it did not feel energizing. Signals are often misunderstood when they do not match expectations. People expect transitions to feel dramatic or enlightening. Sometimes they feel quiet and heavy instead. Sometimes growth feels like compression before expansion. The key detail is this: you did not spiral. You did not numb out completely. You did not lose your sense of direction. You noticed the symptom and kept moving forward without forcing an explanation. That tells us the signal did its job. What you experienced was not a problem to fix. It was information preparing you for a clearer understanding of what you were moving through. And now, that understanding can be approached without confusion or self-blame. Because what caused the signal was not random, and it did not come from within you alone. What you were responding to did not originate inside your imagination. It did not come from overthinking or personal weakness. It came from pressure that existed independently of your awareness, and it arrived with timing. Recently, not distant past, not long ago. There was a period where multiple demands, expectations, or uncertainties converged. Not necessarily dramatic events, but a coordinated accumulation. Subtle shifts in tone from others. Delays where movement was expected. Increased responsibility without increased clarity. Moments where it felt like you were holding more than usual, while receiving less feedback or support. This was not chaotic pressure. It was structured. Pressure like this does not announce itself with obvious threats. It applies itself evenly, persistently, testing regulation, rather than provoking reaction. Its purpose is not to overwhelm immediately, but to observe how a system behaves under sustained load. And you remained functional. You woke up. You moved through your day. You made decisions without impulsivity. You did not abandon your values. You did not lash out or shut down. Even when motivation dipped, your core structure stayed intact. That matters more than dramatic endurance. Many people interpret pressure only when it becomes unbearable. You registered it while it was still quiet. That tells us your awareness is tuned. Your system noticed the shift early, adjusted internally, and continued operating. There may have been moments when you felt watched, evaluated, or subtly challenged without clear explanation. Not in a paranoid way, in a factual way. Like circumstances were asking a question without words. How will you respond when comfort is reduced? How will you move when affirmation is absent? How will you hold yourself when momentum slows? You answered without realizing you were answering. The key detail is not that pressure existed. Pressure exists in many lives. The key detail is that it was intentional in structure and recent in timing, and you did not fracture under it. You did not need to prove anything. You did not perform resilience. You embodied it. This was not a confrontation in the dramatic sense. There were no visible adversaries, no clear moments of decision. It was a quieter assessment spread across days or weeks, embedded in ordinary life. And still, you stayed coherent. That coherence is what drew attention. Not because you resisted forcefully, but because you did not need to. Your regulation held. Your presence remained. Understanding this reframes the entire experience. What felt like unexplained heaviness was actually the residue of sustained pressure passing through a stable structure. And now that pressure has begun to ease, not because it failed, but because it received its answer. You remain standing. To understand what you moved through it helps to break the pressure down into its components. Not to dramatize it, but to make it intelligible. What you experienced was not one thing. It was a cluster of pressure points applied simultaneously, each subtle on its own, but significant together. The first was doubt. Not loud self-doubt. Not spiraling questions about your worth or direction. It was quieter than that. A low-level questioning of timing, of pacing, of whether your steadiness was being mistaken for stagnation. You may have noticed thoughts like, "Why does this feel slower than expected?" Or "Am I missing something everyone else seems to grasp?" These thoughts did not take over. You observed them. You did not let them dictate your behavior. That is regulation. The second was fear, but not fear of failure. It was the fear that comes from responsibility without visibility. The sense that something important was unfolding, but without clear markers or guarantees. Fear often destabilizes people by pushing them toward urgency or avoidance. You did neither. You continued to act thoughtfully. You allowed uncertainty to exist without demanding immediate resolution. That restraint kept you grounded. The third pressure point was energy drain. Not exhaustion from overwork, but depletion from sustained vigilance. When awareness stays high for long periods, energy can thin without obvious cause. You may have felt slower in the mornings, less inclined to engage in unnecessary conversations, more selective with your attention. Instead of pushing harder, you naturally reduced output while maintaining essentials. That is not collapse. That is intelligent conservation. The fourth was isolation. Not physical isolation, but the feeling of carrying something internally that others were not attuned to. Conversations may have felt slightly misaligned. You might have felt present, but not fully mirrored. This kind of isolation often leads people to over-explain or withdraw completely. You did neither. You stayed connected where it mattered and conserved depth where it was not required. That balance protected your coherence. The fifth pressure point was delay. Momentum slowed, feedback lagged, outcomes took longer to materialize. Delay destabilizes many people because it tempts them into impulsive action or self-sabotage. You stayed measured. You did not rush to force progress. You did not abandon your standards to relieve discomfort. You allowed time to do its work. Each of these pressure points tested a different aspect of internal stability. Cognitive clarity, emotional regulation, energy management, social grounding, patience. What matters is not that you felt these pressures. Anyone could feel them. What matters is how you remained stable through all of them at once. You did not resolve doubt by pretending certainty. You held it without letting it erode you. You did not eliminate fear by denying it. You acknowledged it without obeying it. You did not fix energy drain by overexertion. You adapted your pace without losing direction. You did not respond to isolation by seeking validation. You stayed authentic without demanding recognition. You did not react to delay with desperation. You trusted your timing without disengaging. This is internal regulation at a high level. There was no dramatic moment where you decided to be strong. No internal speech about endurance. You simply continued to operate from your baseline. That baseline is what matters here. People often imagine resilience as something activated under stress. In reality, the most reliable resilience is structural. It shows up when pressure is present, but behavior remains consistent. When values stay intact, when attention stays oriented. That is what happened. The pressure did not need to break you to be effective. It needed to see whether you would destabilize yourself under quiet strain. You did not. You adjusted internally and stayed present externally. That is rare, not because others are incapable, but because most people have not built that kind of internal coherence yet. You did not overpower the pressure. You outlasted it by remaining yourself. That is why this period mattered. And that is why it is now being examined with clarity rather than confusion. Now there is enough distance to review what occurred without distortion. Not emotionally, analytically. When pressure is active, perspective narrows. The system prioritizes stability over interpretation. That is why during the experience you did not label it clearly. You were busy staying coherent. Only after pressure passes does evaluation become possible. This is that moment. Looking back, it becomes clear that chance does not adequately explain what happened. The alignment of timing, the specific nature of the pressure points, and the way they tested different layers of your functioning rule out randomness. This was not bad luck. It was not a rough patch that happened to coincide with internal fatigue. It was a structured interaction between demand and capacity. You can see this now because nothing actually went wrong. There was no damage to repair, no mess to clean up, no apology tour, no rebuilding phase. Your life did not require recovery. It required recognition. That alone confirms resilience. If this had been coincidence, there would have been spillover. missed obligations, emotional outbursts, regressive choices. Instead, there was continuity. Your behavior remained aligned with your values. Your decisions stayed measured. Your sense of self did not fragment. That does not happen by accident. Another important detail emerges on review. You did not rely on external reassurance to stabilize yourself. You did not need constant validation to stay grounded. You did not escalate situations to provoke clarity. You tolerated ambiguity without self-betrayal. This points to internal coherence rather than external dependence. When people lack coherence, pressure exposes it quickly. They grasp for certainty. They seek control. They manufacture urgency. You did none of that. You allowed things to be unresolved without panicking. That is not passive. That is regulated. There is also clarity now around what did not help, and that matters. Productivity hacks did not fix the fatigue. Overthinking did not create insight. Explaining yourself did not bring relief. What helped was maintaining rhythm, keeping simple routines, respecting your limits without dramatizing them. Your system already knew what to do. This review removes the temptation to romanticize the experience or dismiss it. It was neither a crisis nor a triumph. It was a confirmation, a quiet verification that your internal structure holds under sustained pressure. Understanding this shifts how you interpret future strain. You no longer need to fear it or chase it away. You can recognize it as information, as feedback about capacity rather than a threat to identity. That is the confirmation. Not that you are invulnerable, not that you are special in a grand sense, but that your baseline is stable, and stability under pressure is not common. This is not something to announce. It is something to know. And knowing it changes how you stand in what comes next. When you place your experience alongside common human reactions, the contrast becomes clear without needing exaggeration. Under far less pressure, many people lose orientation. Their sleep collapses. Their emotions spike unpredictably. Their behavior becomes reactive. Small delays trigger outsized responses. Minor uncertainty turns into urgency or withdrawal. This is not a moral failure. It is simply how unregulated systems respond to strain. You were exposed to layered pressure, and yet your presence remained intact. You did not spiral. You did not disengage from your responsibilities. You did not seek relief through impulsive decisions. You stayed available to your life. You stayed responsive rather than reactive. That alone places your response outside the statistical norm. Most people require reassurance to remain steady. You tolerated the absence of it. Most people need clarity before they can move forward. You moved forward without it. Most people interpret fatigue as a sign to either push harder or give up entirely. You adjusted your pace without abandoning direction. This is not about superiority. It is about pattern recognition. Your stability did not come from denial or emotional suppression. It came from integration. Your thoughts, emotions, and actions stayed in dialogue with each other. None of them took over. None of them were silenced. They stayed coordinated. That coordination is rare because it requires maturity, not intensity. Many people can rise dramatically in moments of inspiration. Far fewer can remain regulated during extended periods of ambiguity. Inspiration is stimulating. Ambiguity is draining. You stayed present through the latter without demanding the former. That is uncommon. Notice what you did not do. You did not dramatize your experience to make it feel meaningful. You did not minimize it to escape discomfort. You allowed it to exist without narrative inflation or dismissal. That neutrality protected your equilibrium. In contrast, many people inflate pressure into crisis because they do not trust themselves to hold it quietly. Others dismiss pressure entirely and then wonder why they eventually collapse. You did neither. You acknowledged weight without turning it into identity. This is why rarity can be acknowledged without ego. Rarity here does not mean better. It means less frequent. It means your system has been shaped by prior experiences, reflection and restraint in a way that allows it to stay coherent under load. You did not become someone else when pressure arrived. You remained yourself. That consistency is the point. When pressure reveals rather than reshapes it, tells us something fundamental about internal structure. Yours is not built on performance. It is built on regulation. And regulation, once established, does not announce itself loudly. It simply holds. What became clear through all of this is that your strength did not switch on in response to pressure. It was already there. This matters because activated strength looks different from baseline strength. Activated strength is effortful. It requires motivation reminders and often external support to sustain. Baseline strength is quieter. It does not feel like power. It feels like normalcy, even when conditions are demanding. That is the kind you demonstrated. You did not rise to the occasion. You operated from preparation you may not have consciously acknowledged. Your responses were not improvised. They were consistent, measured, familiar to you. That familiarity is the signal. It tells us this way of functioning is not new. It is integrated. This is why nothing about the experience felt dramatic or triumphant. You were not exceeding yourself. You were being yourself. There is a temptation to interpret resilience as something mystical or extraordinary. That interpretation often obscures the truth. What held you steady was not a sudden surge of willpower. It was maturity, pattern recognition, an internal agreement between your values and your behavior. You did not need to override your emotions to stay stable. You let them exist without letting them steer. You did not need to silence discomfort. You made room for it without surrendering coherence. That balance only exists when inner structure is already aligned. Preparation is rarely felt in the moment it is tested. It feels ordinary, boring even. You may have thought, this is just how I handle things. That thought is accurate. It is also revealing. Many people believe strength is something they must earn repeatedly. You demonstrated that strength can be a resting state, a default orientation, a way of being that does not require constant reinforcement. This is why identity clarification matters now. You are not someone who becomes steady under pressure by force. You are someone whose baseline includes steadiness. You are not waiting to grow into this. You are already operating from it. There is no need to inflate this into destiny or diminish it into coincidence. It is neither. It is structure, and structure once built does not announce itself. It simply supports everything that rests upon it. This understanding allows you to stop questioning whether you handled things correctly. You did not handle them. You embodied them. That is the identity being clarified here. Now the task is not to analyze what happened any further, but to integrate what you now understand into how you live. Integration is quiet work. It does not require intensity or vigilance. It requires orientation. The first perspective is rest, but not collapse. Rest here means allowing your system to return to its natural rhythm without guilt. You do not need to justify needing space or quieter days. Your stability did not come from constant output. It came from regulated pacing. Honor that by letting recovery be deliberate, not reactive. The second perspective is discernment. Not everything that asks for your attention deserves it. Pressure sharpened your ability to sense what matters and what does not. Keep that filter. You do not need to explain your boundaries. You can simply observe where your energy aligns and where it drains and choose accordingly. The third perspective is boundaries, especially internal ones. You do not need to carry unspoken expectations or unresolved tension for others. You are allowed to leave some things unprocessed by design. Boundaries are not walls. They are points of clarity where responsibility ends. The fourth perspective is patience, not waiting. Patience here means staying oriented without forcing outcomes. You already proved you can remain stable through delay. Let that be evidence that timing does not threaten you. You can continue moving forward without rushing yourself or the world. The fifth perspective is focus. Not hyperfocus, gentle focus. Choose a small number of priorities that feel grounded and real. Let everything else be secondary for now. Coherence grows when attention is not fragmented. You do not need to optimize every area of your life at once. The sixth perspective is balance. Awareness does not mean scanning for pressure or anticipating the next test. It means staying present with what is actually happening. You are not on alert. You are oriented. There is a difference. As you integrate these perspectives, notice how your body responds. Stability often returns as subtle relief rather than excitement. Things may feel simpler, quieter, more contained. That is not a loss of momentum. It is alignment. You do not need to tell this story to anyone. You do not need to make meaning out of it publicly. Its value is internal. It informs how you move, how you decide, how you can serve yourself. Integration is complete when you stop revisiting the event and start trusting what it revealed. Let the understanding settle without commentary. Let it inform your pace without becoming a rule. Let it remind you that you do not need to prove stability again. You already know what it feels like to remain standing, and that knowing is enough to carry you forward with calm certainty. You can let your shoulders drop now. Nothing is being demanded of you in this moment. Nothing is about to be taken away. What matters has already been established quietly and without spectacle. You remained present when it would have been easier to drift. You stayed coherent when pressure asked for fragmentation. That is the core realization, and it does not need repetition to hold its weight. This is not about winning. It is about alignment. You do not need to replay what happened to make it real. You do not need to defend your experience or justify your pace. The fact that you are still here, still oriented, still yourself, is the confirmation. Fate does not bow to force. It yields to stability. And stability is what you embodied. Carry this gently. When fatigue returns, you will recognize it as information, not failure. When silence appears, you will understand it as space, not absence. When timing slows, you will remember that delay does not erase direction. Let these affirmations settle not as mantras, but as acknowledgments. You are grounded even when things are uncertain. You remain yourself even under pressure. You trust your inner structure. There is nothing mystical required here. No heightened vigilance. No constant self-checking. Just a quiet confidence in how you move through life when conditions are not ideal. That confidence is earned, but not through effort, through consistency. If this message resonated, mark it privately or publicly. You can comment 777 or simply write, "I remember," as a signal of recognition, not declaration. Do it only if it feels aligned. If you choose to stay connected, subscribe and continue with the next transmission when it appears. Not because you need guidance, but because clarity compounds when it arrives at the right time. For now, return to your life. Move steadily. Breathe normally. Remain standing. That has always been enough.